if we're going to move forward as an industry, we need original IP. We need original ideas. We need people to trust their instincts and be willing to fund things at these early levels, because that's where things like Bioshock come from. They don't come from P&Ls. They come from, but Bioshock, again, I signed Bioshock when nobody else would sign Bioshock. And Ken reminds me of that over the years, every time I see him. And I'll tell you why I signed it, other than thinking it was cool, other than loving the System Shock series, which it was sort of more.
Welcome to the Rise and Play podcast. I am Sophie Vaux, your host and leadership coach. In the show, my wonderful co-host and I sit down with influential and diverse leaders from the gaming industry to hear about their leadership journey. Not the well-polished stories, but the real stories. The up and down, the breakthrough, and the failures. Or should we rather say learnings? Each episode will transport you into a magical space of vulnerability with our guests. And together, you'll be reminded that no matter how hard it is, you are not alone in this journey, and find the courage to keep going. Come and join the ride. Let's begin. As a former product leader who worked 16 years in the gaming industry, I know how difficult it is to get reliable and usable player insights. The logistics of scheduling, recruiting the right players, collecting and reviewing feedback, it is all time away from game development. But you know how fundamental it is to test assumptions with your core audience and iterate at a lower cost before marketing an unproven game. I am proud to announce Playtest Cloud as our key partner, as I have believed since day one in the quality of their service and their mission to democratize player research. Playtest Cloud can take the hassle out of organizing game research yourself and delivers results within 48 hours, allowing you to implement changes in time for your release. Having been a long-time user of the platform, it is the industry standard used by top AAA and mobile studios, and now they also support indie developers with special pricing. Working for a year on the wrong game is an expensive mistake, and you can de-risk it now by investing in your player research. Check out the show notes for a free trial and learn more about Playtest Cloud. Welcome to a new episode of Rise and Play. Today, I have with me Suzanne Cummings. So for the ones who don't know Suzanne, Suzanne, I would say, is what we call a legend in the gaming industry, because I was not even part of a gaming industry at that time, but counts 25 years in the industry and notable history that was co-founding 2K Games. So some of you maybe know 2K, under Take-Two, and signing critically acclaimed franchises such as Bioshock, Borderlands. I played Borderlands, the 2 titles, Civilization, and 2K Sports. Then moved to found her own company, Tiny Rebel, for the past 15 years, and recently launched a new micro studio, which we will talk about today. But yeah, winding down, closing down, transitioning a former studio to a new studio with 10-6 games that we will introduce today. And you've been in the process of fundraising, raising, and starting, incorporating all the learnings from the previous company, and I'm sure your whole history in games, with a new venture to pioneer the next generation of player customization, building innovative roguelike game on top of a new Gen AI powered platform. So quite a lot of different topics here with Gen AI, which is very much in the air for Game Studio, but any new companies. So before we dive into all that book history, I would even say, because there's so much to go deep into today, I want to welcome you properly. Suzanne, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. You say legend, I say just old. I think if you're old and you stayed in the industry long enough, you're bound to stumble into some interesting, things that you've done over the years.
Yeah, I appreciate also that, I feel good to say legend, because sometimes it's true we don't play what we've achieved. But when I look at the history and, something I wanted to acknowledge, running a company is really tough. You've done it for 15 years. And when you close, we will talk about it, the grieving process, and starting again. It's not a normal, common behavior for everyone, everyday people. I wanted to acknowledge that. So it takes a certain character to do that. So it tells me a lot about you just by reading those few lines. But let's start maybe with a start, because I'm very interested also in your career, co-founding 2K Games. Where was the industry at that time? I wasn't in the industry. I started 17 years ago.
It was right around that time. So I went back a long ways with Ryan Brandt, who was the CEO of Take-Two and the founder of Take-Two back then. Sadly, he passed away a number of years ago. But I was involved in the very early days in helping to establish Rockstar. I was working with BMG Interactive, which is what Ryan ended up acquiring. And that's how Rockstar Games came to be. We could fill another hour with those stories and how that happened, how it might have happened differently. And in the end, he did acquire BMG. They did become Rockstar Games. It took a few years for that to really become its thing, when GTA 3 came out. And I and my husband joined Rockstar finally, came out to New York to join them just after GTA 3, right after September 11th, in fact. And so for some years, Lee and I were both on the Rockstar side. And then at the time, Take-Two was Grand Theft Auto. And that was, the only thing that Take-Two really was seeing, which was significant. We used to laugh. It's like saying to Nintendo, don't you have anything other than Mario? I mean, GTA was massive. And so it used to drive us nuts that we were getting beaten up by Wall Street for the fact that we, we're almost like a one-hit wonder as a company. And so anyway, around that time, Ryan stepped down as CEO of Take-Two, and we were looking to start new things. And so several other executives and Ryan and myself started brainstorming about where we wanted to go with things. We had Gathering of Developers at the time, which we had changed management on. We had Gotham Games, which Jamie Lease was running, which we had wound down. And that became Global Star, which Steve Glickstein and I ran. And around the same time, Sega was looking to get out of the sports world. They never managed to compete with Madden. Obviously, Visual Concepts, many people think made a much better football game, but it wasn't enough. So we acquired the sports group out of Sega, which became our 2K franchise, our 2K sports franchise. And that's ultimately why it's called 2K Games, was we weren't very original. We had a sports group to anchor the thing on, and we said we were going to form 2K Games around that. And so essentially it was an amalgamation of a whole bunch of stuff that wasn't Rockstar at Take-Two, got smooshed together into a new label. And our goal as a label was to work with third-party developers. Rockstar, at least at the time, was very much led by whatever games Sam Hauser wanted to make. And they're wonderful games, but there are only so many of those things that you can do. They're so all-encompassing and they take so long. And so our goal was to go out to third-party developers and say, we want to do new things. What do you have that you want to make? Now, remember, this is 2005. And we did a few things differently. We started letting developers hold on to some control of their IP. That's how Borderlands, for example, came to be with Gearbox. We said, we'll share the IP with you. That's getting to be a standard now, sort of 15, 16 years later. But back then it was unusual. And so we, trusted our instincts and signed some really great things that went on to be, still just as important today, like the Bioshock franchise. We were the only ones willing to sign Bioshock, by the way. I've met countless biz dev people over the year who say that, I so badly wanted to sign that, I couldn't convince the company to sign that. Borderlands was signed on a verbal pitch at E3. We bought the Civilization IP from Atari a week after we found out about the opportunity. While every other publisher was doing due diligence, we handed them a $20 million check, took the IP. And perhaps that's where some of my entrepreneurialism comes from, is we were very entrepreneurial as a company at that time. We were smaller and scrappier, and we used our willingness to move quickly as a way of getting ahead as a company.
Wow. I have some follow-up questions, because you shared something important that I have not heard so much in the recent years in gaming. I come more from mobile, so this is not a word that is mentioned, instinct. That's really interesting at that time, spotting potential hits, strong ideas, strong IPs, signing the deals before the main people that are, overthinking it, maybe one would say, because you talk about due diligence and going very instinctively about it, but it's like what you call intuition, having a good sense. And I'm sure it's very part of you as well as a character. So I would like to ask more about that. What is that process happening when you meet those teams, those IPs, and then, this is it, we go, and just a leap of faith, we're going to sign that big deal and go for it?
Years ago, and I'm not a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell and who he is and everything that's come out about him over the years, but I'm sure you've heard of Blink. I thought there was a lot of truth, and it really resonated with me when I read that book. And it talked about how if you do something enough, you start to have this instinctual reaction. I remember he talked about poker players and their palms sweating at certain moments in these tests compared to people who weren't. And I realized as I thought back on what I was doing for a job at the time, that sometimes I'd walk into a room with a developer and almost immediately, I kind of had a sense that something was going to happen here. And I couldn't say exactly what it was. It was something about the team. It was something about the room. It was something about the demo. It was something about the way they talked about it. You really quickly kind of knew if it was going to happen or not. And the same is true for, recruiters who are really good at it and talking to people they would potentially hire. There is a unquantifiable instinct associated with it. And you're right that the industry has changed in that way. I mean, honestly, if you look at 2K, most of what 2K is still today are things that we signed back then. There haven't been a lot of new IP signed there since then. It's a lot of sequels. Part of that is because games have gotten so expensive. If you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars making a game, it's kind of hard to be instinctual about it. And you start having to scrutinize P&Ls and look at comparables. And the point of original IP is nobody has done it before. If it's innovative. It's not to copy it, but if it's innovative, the whole point is to make something new and fresh. And when something is new and fresh, it's very hard to find things to compare that to. And again, if it's expensive, it compounds. That's really interesting right now because the industry is obviously in turmoil. VCs threw tons of money in our industry a few years ago for the first time, right? For years, they didn't want to touch our industry. They threw all of this money at the industry. Budgets went crazy. Everyone wanted to compete at this AAA level because of sales during COVID. And now they're gone. And so now we're back to having studios that want to do original things and they don't know how to fund them because the VCs don't see it as investable. And the publishers aren't used to trusting their instincts anymore either. Or developers don't want to work with publishers. There's all sorts of messes going on. But if we're going to move forward as an industry, we need original IP. We need original ideas. We need people to trust their instincts and be willing to fund things at these early levels, because that's where things like Bioshock come from. They don't come from P&Ls. They come from, but Bioshock, again, I signed Bioshock when nobody else would sign Bioshock. And Ken reminds me of that over the years, every time I see him. And I'll tell you why I signed it, other than thinking it was cool, other than loving the System Shock series, which it was sort of born out of, was I knew how desperately Ken wanted to make the follow-up to System Shock. And I knew that if given the right time and money, really good shot of pulling that off, I didn't think he was willing to screw that up. And that's, the biggest reason we signed it, is the faith in that truth.
Yeah, it's very instinctive. It's not quantifiable, by the way, what you describe.
There are things I didn't sign over the years. And, you do go back and you try to figure out, why didn't you see it?
I mean, we're functioning more like, I don't know, like an organic blur than a machine, right? We are predictable in some way, but not that predictable in all the ways. Otherwise, then we would just engineer everything we do and engineer creativity, which nobody has figured out. So turning creativity into a hit, success, billions, and however we want to turn it. You mentioned that it was a barrier at that time for some IPs to be signed internally, to get greenlighted and so on. What was the different setup you had to just, I believe in that team, in that IP, and I just push? It's for the case of Bioshock. I can imagine somewhere down the line management telling like, no one signed for it, I'm not sure. And then still you made it sign anyway. So
that's the right question. It's a great question. And that is part of it. Ryan, who is the founder of Take-Two, this was kind of his baby, us setting this up together. And he was given the freedom that if he wanted to do it, it happened. I was 29, 30 years old at the time. So it certainly wasn't going to be on the back of if I wanted to do it. But collectively, between the two of us, it meant we could get things done. I mean, he did some wild things at the time. Potentially, they worked. I mean, Oblivion is a great example. Bethesda was putting out Oblivion. Ryan decided to guarantee them $60 million in distribution fees, which was, I think, about a quarter of the money that we had as a label to go forward. And everyone thought he was crazy. I maybe was scratching my head about it too. And I remember that Christoph Hartman and I had to go down to the offices with a $1 million check in a briefcase. And we were told not to hand over that check unless we saw the game. But I'll tell you, the game made it back the first day of distribution. Okay, that,
Wow.
justified that check.
I'm sure that made a lot of people happy.
He was a lot of it. He was a big part of it. And, the relevance of that is having a champion within these publishers who is trusted, who can be instinctual. And, it's becoming a lost art. And, it's not going to come from the VCs because most of them don't come from our game industry. Ed Freeze is the exception to the rule. There aren't many of those exceptions to the rule who actually do acutely understand original IP in our industry and want to love and nurture that stuff. We need more Eds.
I relate. I love what OneUp has brought, in the space, with a different lens. We need more of that.
100%. We were their third investment, Tiny Rebel. So I spoke to Ed at length about it before he set it up, because we've known each other for 25 years or so. And I was thrilled. I thought there was no one better to do it than him. So he invested in Tiny Rebel. We were the third investment, and we were the first to return money back to the fund as well, which I'm very proud of. And that money got reinvested into other studios and things. So that was a
Wow.
high point.
Yeah. Let's talk about that then. 15 years ago, it's quite a ride for a studio. So where were you when you started Tiny Rebel Games? Was it which platform? And the thesis you had, to start your own company? Did you fundraise immediately? What was the journey?
So Tiny Rebel was, after we left Take-Two, we started another company with Ryan. And then my partner is my husband. We've worked together for 25, 26, 27 years now. Our son was born in 2008. He was born 7 weeks early, which was terrifying for us. And we both decided to take some time. He was fine. He's absolutely fine. Now he's a teenager and almost 17. But at the time we decided to take 6 months off. Well, we decided to take an unclear amount of time off. And then 6 months later, we were itching to get back to work. And, my husband's extremely creative. He redesigned Bully when they were going to terminate the game at Rockstar. He was on the Grand Theft Auto production team. And so I knew that my background is business production. So the two of us collectively could do some cool things together and maybe be outside of that corporate environment that we were really burnt out on. And so Tiny Rebel was started, the two of us, and it was never meant to be more than the two of us. We kind of felt like, TV showrunners, that we were just going to be this husband and wife team and pick the stuff we wanted to work on and just have a lifestyle that allowed us to be parents as well. So the company morphed a lot over the years. So it started with those very humble aspirations. We did a lot of firefighting. We worked with Atari, with Majesco, with Paramount and others to help, run product development. And we ended up out in LA because Paramount hired us to run their games group. And so we got to work with Bad Robot on a Star Trek game. We got to work on my favorite thing in my career, which is a War of the Worlds game with Patrick Stewart. And then mobile was taking off and we couldn't get anything funded that wasn't mobile. So we got the rights to Doctor Who. And we did a very early mobile game called Doctor Who Legacy that was inspired by Puzzle and Dragons. And that was our first foray into mobile when nobody knew what they were doing, certainly not us. We managed to do 3 million installs of that game by sheer force of will. Yeah. We didn't spend any money on user acquisition. That was just back when that was actually possible. So that was wonderful. It was a much loved game. The community still asks us to bring it back. So I'm quite proud of that as well. In any case, about 9 years ago, we decided to move to Wales, where my husband is from, uproot, leave LA, and Tiny Rebel changed again. We set up the UK, closed our US business, set up a UK business by the same name. And we kind of never looked back. It's been a very interesting, innovative 9 years. We were funded by the Welsh government to do a follow-on Doctor Who game, which was a small project with some very talented comic book folks. And then we got into augmented reality, which we were involved in for right up until last year. We won a major government grant to work with men on Wallace and Gromit. Did some really cool stuff with Wallace and Gromit in augmented reality. In 2022, in the middle of COVID, we raised a 7 million seed round, which was the most complex, crazy, naive thing I've ever done, in the sense that if I had any idea how low the chances are as a woman of pulling that off, I don't know if I've been told lots of times in my career that something isn't ever going to happen. And I tend to not listen to that. And I just make it happen. And that's kind of what happened, is I wasn't willing to give up and plagued with imposter syndrome like everybody else, managed to pull it off that winter. Tiny Rebel was building the next generation of Nintendogs. And it was a big, bold aspiration across platforms, across devices, a generational thing that would always be yours. And unfortunately, the market shifted and we suddenly had far too many people, far too bold a vision, and had to reevaluate what we were doing. Sort of what led us into last year and to me setting up 10-6 Games.
Wow, what a second ride. That's why before we started to talk, it's like we cover several lifetime of the Suzanne, and I can feel the way you talk about it. It felt like I'm traveling with you in time, and you build a family at the same time. So I didn't talk about that, but this is its own adventure. Wow, let's break it down a bit around Tiny Rebel Games. So, as I understood correctly, you started the business really like a humble lifestyle, bootstrapping, making revenues, going where led by your heart, still working closely with IPs, interesting ones that had an audience that followed on a good timing on mobile and platform. So I think the time you launched with an IP was the right time, very hard today, but to get those millions of downloads, very difficult. But I was at GameLab at the time, so I was following also what was happening in the mobile touch screen phase, Apple Store. So that's very interesting. And one point that really intrigues me. So you're running the company this way, small, lean lifestyle, where I'm sure you have, I don't know if it's that crazy as running a VC-backed company, and suddenly you go in a different ball game, raising seed. You said 7 million. What happened here? I need to understand more of the steps where you even...
We would just come off the Doctor Who game, the second game, which didn't go to plan. It turns out, our users were pissed off. They wanted the first game, more of that. And we were trying to take it in a different direction. It's an age-old tale. And we were encouraged to bid for an augmented reality grant, like I mentioned, from Innovate in the UK. It was to define the future of the moving image with mixed reality. And so that's how we ended up working on Wallace and Gromit. Ed Freeze had just set up One Up and had a very specific model of putting $500,000 investments into studios, especially female-led studios, minority-led studios, all wonderful. And I said, I need cash flow. I don't actually need money. I just need cash flow because of the way the grant pays out. And so we took the investment in. And when I came out of the other side of that project, I still had $500,000 in the bank. I remember saying to Ed, what should I do? We've got this idea about Nintendogs games and virtual pets. And I said, maybe I'm going to try to raise a little bit more money. Maybe I'll try to raise a convertible note. And he said to me, would you just go raise a price round? He said, there's loads of money out there. It's a really good idea. And I remember he said to me, go raise 3 million on 15 and just come back to me when you're done. It's basically its way of putting it. No talk of it's hard as a woman. No talk of I had 2 employees at the time. We were a team of like 4 people. And I remember him laughingly saying, because there were a lot of syndicate rounds coming together then. And I did have 26 people sign our shareholders agreement. And he said, could you try not to have as many investors as I have LPs? So he just thought this was hilarious. It was when Web3 was huge. There were some Web3 aspects of our project. So I'm not kidding myself. We were hitting a lot of the interest and buzz areas of the time. So, as we closed, we were about 7 people. And then over the course of 2 years, we ultimately grew to about 24 people, which was a huge mistake. It's probably the biggest mistake I made was growing too fast. And that's a very hard thing to undo. It's very easy to think it's easy. That layoffs, right? Like what we just watched last year. Yeah. But layoffs are a self-fulfilling prophecy in some ways. As soon as you start laying people off, everyone else is looking to leave too. So it's not just as easy as saying, cut staff. That really starts to cut the psyche of the staff. The better plan, and I say this as someone there are people who know far more than me about running studios. But what I've learned is it's better to do the slow climb into it than hire a bunch of people and then try to figure out what to do with it because you got too big and, it might implode as you start to lay people off. We did get up to in the 20s. And in some ways, it was wonderful. I loved my team, and I still do. And I think they're some of the most talented people I've ever worked with. Everyone who works at Tiny Rebel, I think we hired really well. And I always wanted to run a studio. My partner was a bit more skeptical on whether we wanted to take on the stress of that. But he sort of let me off. Just go, and I'll design it. You go do the business side of things. And that's always been the way we've worked. So I definitely enjoy running a studio. And yeah, there's certain weird skill sets required to run a studio. And I think one of them is probably one of the most challenging things about running a studio is being willing to be the person to make the call. You'll surround yourself with a team, and that the main thing they need from you is someone being willing to make the call, to have their neck on the line, to make a decision. It's really hard sometimes, and you don't know what the right answer is. But what I learned in the last few years is I'm the one who's like, look, all right, I'm going to make a call with this. And it's going to be my neck if I'm wrong. But if you don't have someone who's willing to make a decision like that, it's never going to work. Someone has to be willing to do that.
Thank you for now, and I have the dots connected as well. And that's an interesting timing, because the way, again, you talk about it was not how you started, but how it turned out to be. So why not, taking that level of funding? But I put it in context today. 7 million sounds so big for me. It's such a large sum where it's like, wow, you can do many, many things. But of course, I'm sure it can go really fast at a time where when you receive that amount, you need to spend it. That's why you receive it. And then it can go really fast with a large team. And you shared some learnings, very key learnings, because over a decade, I'm sure there are quite many learnings, but a very important one about scaling up and down the team, much easier to scale up than down. And that's also the same echo. I've been also going through that process. And it's really interesting because I hear so often, but still people have to do the mistake by themselves to actually learn. So I don't know what to do with it, but we sometimes we don't know our limits or how we will feel in the situation of having actually to, second learning you shared, make the hard decision to act on, the cost, the team size, direction where you're not sure. That is also something I've seen in learning of founders where they thought they could continue doing what they love to do when they were smaller and being hands-on. Whereas you end up being in a position to have to make decisions, it's a lot more strategic, less doing and more steering, arranging. What other learnings are prominent for you? Because I'm sure there were many, but if any others come to mind that you would want to share for other founders.
I think the most important thing, and probably more important than ever because of budgets and the challenges of raising funding right now, is validating early. The founder of LinkedIn, I only heard this quote recently, said that if you aren't embarrassed by your demo, you're waiting too long. It's too late. And I think that really hit a nerve with me when I heard that. And we all know it. Like, there's nothing earth-shattering in me saying you should build early and you should test and you should build until you're ready to build. It's really hard to do that in practice because going back to being the leader and making those decisions, your team isn't going to want to do that in all likelihood. Creative people want to perfect, and keep it close and don't want everyone to know what they're doing, or it's not quite ready yet. They're not going to see the magic yet. You have to test. You have to constantly be testing. Otherwise, you're building the wrong thing. And I saw it happen so many times. And it's like, oh my God, why did we build that? We didn't need that. And if you're too big, you end up giving people busy work that you need to give them something to do. People get antsy, people get bored. And so you end up building the wrong things instead of pulling your resources into the things that you validated and you know to be true. So that's the most important thing. That's why I'm so in love with the indie model right now. I think that really magic stuff happens in small groups. Even when I see the difference now with, my team is 7 people. We're all on a call together and making, creative decisions together and being iterative. And I couldn't have done that before. I could have taken little small groups together, but you can't have everybody in the room when you're 25 people. And so you spend a lot of your time catching everybody up and, managing personalities and managing conflicts, having to explain to everybody why this decision was made in that room that they weren't in. When you're small, you are all in the room together and you unshackle yourself from process getting in the way. That's the other thing, if you have to have the right process for the size of your studio. When we had grown to 25 people, we started to have very regimented agile sprints in place with, backlog grooming and retros and reviews. And it's so much, 80% of your time was spent on that as opposed to the actual creation. And it was frustrating to no end how slowly things were suddenly happening. Or a thing that I knew, because we were doing live user testing, we needed to change this week so that we could get it out into testing. And then I'm hearing it's going to take me 3 weeks to get that. We're going to have to juggle other priorities around. I learned, I'm like, this is just not working. We need to completely break this whole process and get to shorter windows of time to get to what we need, which is, now it's a very different process from how we worked before. We have Trello is about as complex as we get compared to what we had before. And it's very liberating. The other thing it means, is when a team gets big, you have to start to tell people to stay in their lane. We had our artists and our programmers sometimes butting heads because I had, a very creative programming team who wanted to be involved in the art team. And, everyone has an opinion on everyone else's stuff and people treat things the wrong way. It's Slack. And so I spent a lot of time telling people to stop commenting on things that, where they didn't want comments. But now everyone has to work in multiple lanes. And I'm seeing how much happier they are to be unhinged from having to be so regimented. So much wonderful stuff comes out of that.
A very, very important learning. And it's sometimes, fortunately, it's not because we know that we will apply it, but we will repeat it again and need to test, start early. Yeah, and much harder when you are that big ship of people because you have to align or you have to displace. So when you don't like to displace, this is painful. And when you have to align, it takes longer. So keeping the agility or the small sized lean.
I think mentors help and advisors help and people, who help to remind you of your past lessons. You need people that aren't just going to tell you that you're great. You need people who will call you on the stuff that, they're not sure you're doing the right way. I think that's really important as well.
Yeah. So I want to look also at your leadership team, which are the co-founders, you, and it's not the typical setup. I have met few companies along the way where there were partners and partners in life. And I'm sure you have iterated quite a lot over 15 years and even working before together. How did it work for you to work as spouse, husband and wife? And how did you separate the role? How did you separate the life as well, the work? Or maybe, so I'm always curious to hear how it works. And from my experience, it has always been quite a personal answer. So I'm curious about what was your case.
God, Lee and I met in 1998 in San Francisco. I was early on in my career. He was on holiday. We met playing video games together online, Grand Theft Auto 1. And a very long story short, as we met, we fell in love, we got married 6 months later. And we've been together ever since. And so, Lee and I are best friends as much as anything else. Husband and wife, co-founders, but I think we're just two people who would really rather be around each other and our son than anybody else. So there's that. There's a lot of love, between us. But I think we're quite good at knowing where each of our strengths are and kind of deferring to the other on those things. I trust Lee where it comes to creative decisions and design and what makes things fun. We're both gamers, but he'll always be a bit more of a hardcore gamer. He's much better at games than I am. And so ultimately, I tend to defer to his creative judgment. I have opinions. I often have opinions and tell them. But when it comes down to it, that's his area. And equally so on the business side, Lee stays out of it as much as he can because he wants to stay out of it. And so, where it comes to raising money, where it comes to investor meetings and managing our board and managing relationships there, Lee would very happily not have anything to do with any of that, and where it comes to production and the management of the product and where we're going, we tend to do that together. So that's kind of where our overlap is, establishing what our goals are with the team and how we get there, what's most important and how this sort of iterative process is going to work. I think if we were both creative directors or we were both, the business folks, maybe you'd butt heads more. It is kind of ironic because Lee was an economics major in college and I was an English major. So how that ended up, I have no idea. And it's hard. Look, honestly, I don't think I would ever recommend to anybody, unless you stumbled into it on your own, that you should go and start a business with your partner in life. Because I'll tell you, what's hard is when it's not going well. And when things are bleak, and they're going to be bleak, everything isn't roses, or it wouldn't be so hard to be a founder. When things are bleak, it's really hard to separate yourself from it. Our son helps, because if all we're doing is talking about work as a teenager, he's very quick to remind us that we're talking about work again. So there's a bit of that, but there are definitely times where it's stressful and you kind of wish you had a partner who had nothing to do with the business that you could just talk to about it. We've made it work, the wins make it worth it. We've loved building things together and, making games together. We both love video games. And I don't think either of us can imagine ourselves doing anything else.
Thanks for candid sharing. That's what sometimes the new or rising founders need to hear, because there's a lot of dreams when you build a company and hope, and hopes are sometimes very naive, as you know. So I appreciate that truth, because exactly, in the harder times, you can't really choose when to load off, and you can't in that case. So can't imagine, but I'm receiving what she's sharing. Yes. I would not work with my partner.
Well, I can't see why. It's funny. I did have one VC say to me that they wouldn't invest in our company because we were husband and wife founders. They had a policy against that. And I found that shocking, annoying and shocking. And the big thing, though, is I've watched plenty of founders split up over the years. I've never seen a husband and wife founder team split up over the years. It's a much bigger decision. It isn't like I'm going to go off and get a different job and here's my shares. You don't split up as founders and stay together as husband and wife. Unless you really just come to the conclusion together in a really nice way. It's probably not. And so I tend to think that there's some safety in that.
Well, you're the case that you go again on the ride together. We'll talk about that soon. I want to hear the end of the phase of Tiny Rebel. What was the signal when you started to think, okay, this is not going in the right direction, let's try to change? So what were the signals when you're ready, we need to change course? And maybe by that time, I don't know if it was too late, it was a different time in market, and then it didn't work out this way.
Yeah, this goes into another lesson, is we couldn't raise enough money to get to a next inflection point. We could have raised a little bit more money, but it would have extended things by a few months and we would have been at exactly the same place. We knew it was going to take at least another 6 months to get to where we wanted to go. And a couple of deals didn't happen that we expected to. And so you finally had to look at it and say, look, if I hold this back any longer, I can't even pay severance for my staff. So at some point you have to say, it's not responsible for me to take any more funding in. We had wonderful investors at Tiny Rebel. They were largely focused on the Web3 side of what we're doing. And when that suddenly became not the right decision for the product, we were kind of left in a place where, okay, they all like us and we like you, but we don't really fit into the thesis of your funds anymore. And so it got complicated. And I think everyone knows that I did try to move mountains, and, we tried everything we possibly could, and then ultimately had to face reality that the path we were going to, we just couldn't fund it to get. I still believe in it. I still think it was a wonderful thing we were building. And I think our goals were great and audacious, but we were never going to get, in this economy, the kind of money together that we needed to get there. So we still haven't decided kind of on the future of the IP with Tiny Rebel and what we're going to do about that. I still remain convinced that someday there'll be a time for Petaverse. It's just Petaverse's time wasn't right now. I was supposed to say I'm off then. That was the decision that we took, and my advisors were suggesting, and we didn't take as much time as we told we should take. We just started talking about, it was Lee and I, sitting outside over a drink, talking a lot about what we wanted to do next and what we have learned from where we are and what all that might mean. And that's what 10.6 came out of. It was really just, later the same year that we started trying to get a little team back together. But, with very specific goals. I like to think of 10.6 as being a rock band in some ways. And I like to think of that, the idea of the indie developer as rock band, as being something really compelling. A small team of senior folks who are all comfortable working together, who all know how to work together, who have a history together, who can iterate. And, that's very sustainable. I have 4 full-time people and 3 part-time people. Our burn rate is a small fraction of where I was at last year. And that seems to me like something I can sustain. It's not scary to sustain. That's something that I think we can take to, cash flow positive revenue generation. And that's really exciting and means that we have the opportunity to be experimental and playful and kind of decide our own path. And so that was very much the goal of this. I mean, all of my staff are all shareholders. So everyone feels like it's their company, is their company. Even that is just really changes the way you think about things. I can tell that everyone's really proud of what they're building and proud of the fact that it's their thing. I think that's really important too.
How did you come up with the name 10-6?
It's a few things. There was a game maybe before your time at Sega Heat called 10-6. This is going back to the late 90s, right around the time Lee and I met. And some of our future goals for this product take inspiration from that and how we describe kind of where we're going with the product. It's also the police jargon for busy, in terms of like kind of walkie-talkie. And it's my birthday, October 6th. And funny enough, as I was out there talking to folks about this, we were 6 people and I said, we're never going to be more than 10. And so it just really felt like the stars were aligning with that name.
I found intuitively to ask, and I'm glad I did because you followed my intuition. But it was a very intuitive choice. Cool. I have to ask a question about the transition because I'm talking to also founders closing studios these days, and they're depleted. Some are really burnt out. They probably maybe don't want to build a company again so soon or ever. I don't know. So there's kind of a down energy. You talked about also taking some time off. What shifted to go again back on the horse? And fundraising right now is really tough. That's the feedback I have from everyone. And you have to keep doing it, trying. So I'm curious, what gave you that boost of energy to go again, do it? And you did fundraise. So we can say also it will be shared publicly that you've closed. I'm really admirative of that level of energy because I know it requires a lot of energy.
Yeah. So my whole career, Lee has some really cool ideas and I go out and try to figure out a way to bring them to life, in terms of raising money or bringing people together. And it was, essentially that again. It was, there were generative AI is something we love innovation, innovative tech, not for the gimmick, but for what does this allow us to do that we couldn't do before? That was why we were interested in augmented reality. It was why we were interested in Web3. It was never about the scammy things. It was about what are the sort of really cool, interesting, novel use cases. And generative AI interested us as well. I said, what could this make possible that isn't possible otherwise? Less about replacing people's jobs and more about what new things, novel things does this unlock? He had things that he wanted to do. And I said, do you want to take time or should we take time off? He said, if we wait too long, then we might miss the opportunity. It's a cool idea, but everyone's got cool ideas. So part of it was, was that I think we get very antsy when we're not busy. As much as we always talk about wanting time off, I think we both get really stir crazy when we try to take time off. So, and I had a couple engineers that, wanted to get back to work and people I really love working with. And so part of it was just the opportunity to keep some really good people employed to get their salaries again. We forwent our salaries the first 6 months of this. We've only just started paying ourselves. So that was our, sort of angel investment into our own thing, which isn't possible for everyone. So, I'm grateful that we were able to do that. And that was a decision we made collectively. We did raise money. We've raised money twice now. We raised money in December, just as we were setting up. We did a safe and we've just closed the second one this week. Pretty much the same investors, but, a new deal. It's not the sort of money I raised, when I closed Tiny Rebel seed round by any means, but it's the money that we needed. I knew what we needed to get the game to market and I was able to secure that. So, that's really exciting. It means that I don't have to bang my head against the wall because it is hard. I don't think the VCs are coming back to our space anytime soon. I think that we have to think differently about funding. I think that there is a, dare I say, moral imperative right now that successful people in our industry start giving back on angel investing. And I don't mean that in like a socialist, way. I mean, like, reinvest in stuff that you, more than anyone as a successful founder, are ready to judge. We know our industry. We know what games are potentially worth funding. We all know it's risky and da, da, da. But if you've been successful in the game industry, look for opportunities to angel invest and mentor and support. I angel invest, and I'm a part of Game Angels group that Nick Button runs, and I'm a part of PlayCap with Bibby. And I've been talking quite a bit and trying to thought lead about the fact that angel investing doesn't have to be as scary as people think it is. It doesn't have to be $1 million. It could be $5,000. And obviously, this isn't investment advice, and be sure you're ready to lose the money. We know our industry is luck driven too. But I think part of it is that I think angel investment is going to be profoundly important right now to our industry if we're ever to get out of this mess. I think you have to be creative about things like grants and match programs like what British Business Bank is doing over here. We had 2 different institutional match partners for our investment money, which is one of the reasons I was able to raise. So I think that's really important. I think publishers are really important again. And publishers being willing to take early risks, not just looking for the sort of risks that VCs want, but taking early risks, funding these early ideas. Yeah, it is a hard time to start something. I certainly would not want to start a AAA studio right now. I don't, I think AAA developers should be going to publishing. I don't think that the VCs are going to bring those games to market. They're going to end up doing a publishing deal anyway, This is what I saw happen. I saw so many teams now who raised a seed round and they raised an A round, and they were told you would then get your 50 million B round and you'd go to market. And none of them got their B rounds. And so they ended up either squeaking to market or doing Kickstarters or doing publishing deals. And the publishing deals look exactly like they would have looked like if they hadn't raised VC money. So that's frustrating. And so I don't trust that as a model. I think VCs are great for the tech stuff, for the platforms, enabling tools and technologies, et cetera. But I think where it comes to the business of making games, that's publishing and angel investment.
And that's the route you took for the fundraising.
We'll probably do a publishing deal, but we'll be able to do a publishing deal, kind of on our terms. We can get our game from a development standpoint to market. We may bring in a publisher to have some skin in the game and throw in their support and knowledge. We're small, so it's really just a matter of bandwidth. But I'm not going to chase VC money. I don't know if I'm ever going to chase VC money again.
That's an important message, because I think you has been mistaken and confused of what the model is. Very, very different than publishing and, what the trajectory of a game company and games, as a business. So I think it's thank you for sharing your experience and how you fundraise this time. Because I was just back from Barcelona with founders trying to raise from VCs.
I think collaborations are also really important. There was an article, I think it was in Games Industry, about a couple studios who sort of formed a JV together to co-develop and share the risk. I think I'd like to see more of that. Studios who can not have to each take on such an overwhelming overhead, but come together. Doctor Who Legacy was co-development. We worked with the team in Taiwan. They did their part. We did our part. We shared revenue when it came to market. So we did that years ago. I think that's a great opportunity again.
Interesting one. I would love to see more of that, but it makes sense, I would say, in terms of business and where we're at. Suzanne, we're reaching the end, and I'm glad I could ask the main big question, but I think for anyone who crossed the path of Suzanne at conferences, please talk to her, because she has a wealth of knowledge based on what you shared today. Is there something at last I didn't ask you, I should have asked, then you can still share?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think what you just said is true. I really do want to help. The last year, seeing how difficult it was, the emotional toll of everything that was going on, I think I've tried to make more of an effort, especially to reach out and help other female founders. And, just like the moral imperative of angel investing, if you can, I think it's also to help and support. I think the industry is headed towards smaller teams, but that means less opportunity for younger folks in the industry. And so I think that we have to get involved and help and support younger folks coming into our industry. I think is really important. And I'm definitely trying to do more of that myself.
Yeah, it's amazing while you're trying also to nourish yourself as building your company. But it's a good reminder, because I'm very fortunate to have received a lot in the industry in my younger years of career. And this is just a virtuous cycle, right? So it's a good reminder to tell people who are, in a more privileged position, if we want to make this industry evolve, it's a collective responsibility.
Absolutely. I think that was really clear at GDC this year as well. That was my takeaway from Game Developer Conference more than anything, was that we've all grown up around each other. There are so many people in this industry that I've known for more than a quarter of a century now. And I think that there are a lot of people who want to back together and help each other. And I'm grateful to be a part of that.
Totally. Well, thank you so much, Suzanne. And I'm glad we could have that in-depth conversation, long overdue, because I learned a lot more about you today and from you. So thank you so much for that. Yeah. And for listeners, please follow the journey of Suzanne and what she's up to, because, it's exciting. And she's doing it with her team and her co-founder. Take care, Suzanne.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks for listening to this latest episode of the Rise and Play podcast. We keep growing our community of conscious leaders across the industry and beyond. If you want to join this movement, please share the podcast with other conscious leaders, because we have so much more we can learn from each other. And if you want to accelerate your growth, I offer creative leadership coaching and workshop, plus other free resources that you can find on riseandplay.io. I can't wait to connect with you. Have a great week, and remember to take care of yourself. Until the next time,